back to Everyday Eternal, everyone. So today we're going to have a cast on miracles, and we have a bunch of guests. So today I'm going to play a little bit of a moderator role. So first, let's introduce Sam.
I'm Sam. I'm on almost every episode, in case you forgot who I am. I'm the guy who posts screenshots of ridiculous moto stacks online and does really poorly at Star City Dallas.
Perfect. Sorry to hear that for you, Sam. Next, another regular, Julian.
Hi, I'm Julian. I'm the guy who likes to cast all the green dudes and complain a lot about X.
That's fair. The next person we have on is actually a new member who has never been on the cast before, Tomas.
Hello, my name is Tomáš Vlček, and with my friends we traveled around the US, and I came 11 in New Jersey, GP New Jersey, and then I was 5th in Star City Richmond, and I had some decent results with Miracles in Europe. I've been playing the deck since about 2012, and I feel really confident with it. I think it's the best deck, and that's why we will talk about it today.
Excellent. Thanks, Tomas. And now, lastly, some random guy from Austria, Philip.
Yeah, hi, I'm Philip Schöniger from Austria. I've been doing quite well with Miracles lately, like all of 2014. I've been on the cast after I top 8 at GP Paris, and now I top 8 at GP New Jersey as well, and yeah, Miracles. Yay!
Yeah, so Philip has played a little bit of Miracles, Tomas has played a little bit of Miracles, Sam has played a little bit of Miracles, and Julian, have you played a little bit of Miracles?
Yeah, I actually played Miracles for like at the very beginning in 2012, and I recently picked it up every now and then when we see good performances out of it, because I agree with Thomas, it's the best deck, and you should at least try to play it.
Yeah, I mean, I've even played a little bit with the deck, and it was a fun time. So to start off, because we're going to talk about Miracles basically for the next hour and a bit, let's kind of start off where the deck kind of started from. So Sam, can you tell us something a little about the beginning of Miracles?
So if you want to talk about the history of Miracles, what you've really got to talk about is the history of CounterTop decks. CounterTop is one of those combinations that you can stick in a lot of decks and not have it be a CounterTop deck, but the history of decks that are trying to do that as their main plan is basically starts with CounterTop Threshold, which later turned into CounterTop Goyf, which essentially was, I'm going to counter a bunch of your guys, and that's going to fill up graveyards, and my Goyf is going to get real big, my Mongoose is going to get real big, my Werebear is going to get real big. I was not playing during this time, so I can't speak a whole lot about this. I don't know if any of the other guys can give a little more info on that particular deck.
Yeah, the archetype that Sam describes wasn't really that big in Europe, at least from my impression, but it was around. It wasn't as well positioned as Miracles is right now, but to me it always felt like strategically somewhat different, because back then, like all the different countertop decks we had, like Dreadstill or Supreme Blue or whatever you want to call it, they actually focused on countertop in the way that once you had it on the table, you really wanted to control the game with it and counter everything. Whereas right now, I feel like it's more of a tool for Miracles. It creates card advantage, but there are not a whole lot of matchups where you would actually think that this is it and this is what I'm doing, and you're never gonna resolve a spell again. Of course, other cards are printed like Kosari Pride Mage, and then we get Frozen Grip and Abrupt Decay, so that also made pick the deck a different strategic outlook, I would say.
Yeah, I was playing during this time when CounterTop Thresh was more popular. It wasn't super popular in our metagame. However, back in the day, you didn't have Abrupt Decay to kind of deal with the countertop, so it was a lot more devastating. But I did play a lot of Dreadstill. Dreadstill was more popular kind of closer to 2012, so kind of the 2010 to 2012 region. Did anyone else play Dreadstill at all?
Yeah, I played it for a couple of tournaments. It was like the deck to beat in at least southern Germany. And I think there were a couple of guys, most of all, I think people remember Marius Hausmann, if you're from Germany, who won like almost every tournament with it there with CounterTop. So yeah, it was definitely the deck to beat. But between 2010 and between 2009 and 2011, actually.
So then moving on from that, because that was kind of in the early 2006, 2007, we moved on to the Thopter builds of Counterbalance. So going back to maybe Tomas, do you recall this deck? Or were you playing then?
Not really. To be honest, I didn't play this deck.
Okay, so Sam, you played a little bit of Thopters, did you not?
Yeah, Thopters was the first counterbalance deck that I played a lot. What you're doing here is just abusing the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meat combo. Usually that would also involve having, say, Enlightened Tutor, which gives you the ability to search for things to put on top with Counterbalance trigger on the stack. That way you can counter just about anything if you absolutely have to. So, if you knew you didn't have a 3 on top, you could just tutor for 1, put it on top, and yeah, you lost your top 3 cards, but you countered whatever, their kill spell. It's a big advantage. I think its kind of fall is same as Dreadstone was. Abrupt Decay is a big hit for it when you can hit the Thopter Foundry and the sword, but also the strength of Graveyard Hate recently has gotten so much better that, if you land a Rest in Peace, that combo is pretty much done.
I also feel like the printing of Entreat the Angels and Terminus kind of spelt the end for this deck, because you were grinding out advantage with Thopters, but then if you could just Entreat the Angels, why would you need 2 cards?
Yeah, and that's the thing I kind of wanted to address a little bit later, but yeah, another big kind of downfall for it was that the cards you could win with in a blue-white X countertop shell, the new win cards were a lot better. After Thopters, I do want to mention there was kind of a weird resurgence, or I guess starting surgence, whatever the word for that is. In 2012, on the Star City circuit, there was about 2 months, and I went through and I looked at it, in about 2 months there were probably 10 top 8s of Rug Counterbalance. And this was essentially exactly what you think of a stock Canadian Threshold list, with Counterbalance in top, usually 4 of both in the main, doing quite well. And it was 2 or 3 months. It was in almost every tournament, and then it just dropped off. And I'm not really sure, but just wanted to throw that out there because it's definitely really interesting.
And if I recall, those were in the months before Terminus and Entreat the Angels were printed.
That sounds correct. I would have to look, but that sounds right.
Yeah, they were printed. Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, that was definitely before Terminus, because I actually played one tournament in Slovenia with Canadian Threshold and Balance and Top in the sideboard. And yeah, the deck was pretty fun. I think that's strictly inferior to typically Canadian Threshold, because you give up so much of your deck's velocity to hedge against the mirror match and burn, basically. That's what we boarded it for. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of fun, but I'm not sure it's any good, to be honest.
And that's probably why we don't see any of it right now.
Yeah.
As in 0 copies.
You do still occasionally see people playing Canadian Threshold style decks with a couple Counterbalance on top on the side. I guess maybe that's hedging their bets against combo even stronger, but as you say, not very common anymore.
So basically, I think it was April of 2012, when Avacyn Restored was printed and gave us those 2 cards, Terminus and Entreat the Angels. So I think Carsten Cotter was one of the first major people to kind of write about it, especially on Star City Games, to kind of talk about it. So, Tomas, when you saw those cards printed, what did you think?
Well, everybody was obviously talking about it, whether it's good enough, whether isn't it too clumsy. You had Brainstorm, but what if you draw it in your opening hand? And I remember it took some time before people start playing it. I remember at the time I was playing blue-white Stoneforge with 4 spell snare, and I remember I just had Terminus or 2, and I wasn't sure whether it's good enough. And I remember once drawing it and playing it, even if I didn't want to, because I wanted to try it. But then I played against this deck several times. I remember for first time I played against it in Annecy in France, against some Danish, Felix friend, and I was quite impressed. And then for GP Ghent, I built a deck and I played with it.
So Sam, what did you think?
I wasn't super active on Magic forums at the time, so I can't go back and look up my thoughts. But I remember I was a big part of the group that was thinking, this miracle mechanic is really, really dumb. And, it resulted in things like the top deck, what was it in the Pro Tour where the guy flipped the top deck and was like, oh, I win. So that was my initial thought, regardless of whether or not they were good enough. Terminus wasn't obvious good enough for me, but Entreat the Angels, that double white is still something that, sometimes you'll draw the card and not have the double white because, you fetched your islands first or whatever. So I was a little iffy. Also, I like sticking to my old decks sometimes, so even after they were printed, I continued to play Thopters for a while.
Philip?
So yeah, there was one big mistake that kind of all of us made. When we looked at these miracle cards, we first thought of them as new cards for the basically blue-white counterbalance deck. So we basically took a look at Entreaty Angel and thought like, oh well, that's actually a good free drop that can finally enhance the counterbalance curve to like a decent bolster of free drop cards that you could actually play and have in your deck to kind of flip off counterbalance. And this was the kind of big mistake that we made. Like, Miracles isn't really a counterbalance deck with Miracles. It's a dividing top deck with counterbalance and Miracles. So yeah, at first I obviously didn't think any good of these cards because I'm terrible at evaluating new cards of new sets without testing. So yeah, I was pretty wrong at first when I saw them.
Julian, what did you think when you saw Terminus for the first time?
I still remember the day when they came out, or let's say 1 or 2 weeks afterwards, because once they became legal, we had a tournament in Nuremberg, and it was completely annihilated by what would later become a Miracles deck. I think it was already pretty close. I don't have the list here, but I wasn't there. But I looked up the list like on Saturday night when the tournament was over, and a friend already had messaged me, oh my god, the sky is falling, look at this, Maverick is dead. Because back then, most of us were playing Maverick, and imagine Maverick is not very well positioned against Miracles, especially when you're totally unprepared for it. So the tournament was completely taken by storm by I'm calling it Miracles. It wasn't really like the Miracles deck we are playing today, but it was in the same train of thought, pre-Miracles, yeah. So at that moment, I immediately picked up Miracles and started working on it. And yeah, I was very positive about the deck and the mechanic because it felt like so overpowered. And yeah, I was overall, I mean, I was happy. I was sad I couldn't play Maverick anymore, but I was pretty excited and looking forward to playing with this new deck.
I agree. When I saw the cards coming out, I wasn't sure if they were good enough, and then you start playing with it and you realize a 1-mana instant speed Wrath of God is pretty good. If you'll also notice, there was a gap in the kind of counterbalance problem from April until October. If you'll notice, Abrupt Decay was not printed until October 2012, or September 2012. So there was a time when breaking up a counterbalance lock, depending on your deck, could have been quite difficult. And I remember thinking, this deck is pretty darn good, but you actually didn't see a lot of it in the States. Because I remember playing in Star City Games, the only one where I did really well, playing Deathrite Shaman and Abrupt Decay, and I was thinking, oh man, this Miracles deck is really good, I better pack more hate for it, and I just didn't see it in the room. So I think it still took a while for the States especially to kind of pick up on it. I don't think it really did until kind of November, December of 2012, which is still, again, showing the gap between the United States and European metagames.
Which is a nice paradox because when Abrupt Decay was printed, everybody was saying, oh, Miracles, it was nice, it was short, but now we have Abrupt Decay, so Counterbalance doesn't mean anything anymore.
Little did they know they had no idea what they were talking about, and
I really agree.
Because, like Philip was saying, the deck is a Sensei's Divining Top deck, and it just happens to have Counterbalance. So
absolutely. I really agree, and we side it out quite often, but I think we'll talk about it later.
Yeah. So moving on. So the deck started off as it has to be a blue-white deck to accommodate kind of what we want to do. But as we know, kind of what were the first builds looking like? We'll say kind of by GP Denver, so that would have been January 2013. Philip, what were the decks looking like then?
When I was starting, basically, I actually have the list that I started building Miracles, and it was actually 4-color. So I was pretty bad. We soon went back to like blue-white, and we actually played around with the black splash back then. A lot of us did, and it's terrible. Like there's basically no reason not to play red over black, because everything black does, red does better, and at instant and cheaper. And it was it wasn't even close, but the gap has widened ever since we got Council's Judgment. So there's literally no reason to run Vindicate anymore. This card is terrible for a strategy like this. Like, there's just no option to play like black. You can make arguments to stay blue-white. It's inferior, but you can do it, which you cannot really argue for blue-white black. That's just... It puts strains on the mana base without adding to the velocity and strength of the deck like that Red Elemental Blast gives you.
Because if I can, my original list, I played 2002 in Ghent in GP, so it was even before. It was really blue-white, and I even played Mishra's Factories, and I played 4 Counterbalance and 4 Terminus because I expected to be very good. And in the GP, I only played against Rag Delver, which Counterbalance top was enough, or I played against Esper Blade, and they had basically one Vindicate, and that was all how they could answer Counterbalance. So it was very, very strong at the time. But I remember playing 3 Mishra's Factory.
Yeah, so do I.
Julian, you said you had the list from GP Ghent in 2012?
Yeah, I just put up the list from GP Ghent 2012 because I wanted to compare it against what we are playing these days. And it's surprisingly close. I wasn't aware that it was that close. For that GP, I was working on the list with Mark Vogt, that some of you guys know personally, I think. For creatures, we played 2 Snapcaster Mages and 2 Vendilion Clicks. Okay, that's maybe not up to date in the list that the Europeans play these days. Then for instance, it was like the usual package of 4 Brainstorm, 4 Forces, 4 Swords to Plowshares, 3 Counterspells, 2 Spell Pierces, 4 Terminus, 2 Entreat, 1 Ponder. Philip will like this. Well, we weren't at 4 yet. I still remember, like, right before the tournament, Mark told me, I don't think we want 3 Snapcaster Mages. I'm pretty sure we want 2 Snapcaster Mages and 1 Ponder. So yeah, 3 Counterbalances, 3 Chase, 4 top, and 22 lands, including 1 Caracas. And I still remember, 2 Humility, or even 3 Humility in the sideboard. And I still lost to Sneak Show, even though I had Humility, just because the guy just killed me the regular way. That was pretty embarrassing. Anyway,
it's funny because...
I'm sorry, I'm just seeing my deck list from GP Ghent, where I was 47, and I have 1 Wasteland as well, 3 Mishra's Factory, and I played Jita in the board with 2 Stoneforge Mystic and Batterskull. Surgical Extraction and Vedalken Shackles.
Yeah, the builds have definitely changed. I remember some people hedging their bets in the mirror with Stoneforge Mystic, or against some creature decks you play Stoneforge and Batterskull, or...
I love how you played 1 Wasteland, because that's the exact same consideration we had, like, right before GP Ghent, to include 1 Wasteland, because we really had trouble speeding Academy Ruins out of lands. I kind of like that we arrived at the same conclusion.
Yeah, it was funny when Julian told us the configuration of his deck. I also had have my deck list from Ghent here, where I won a trial, and it's like 3 cards off. I didn't play Ponder, but yeah, it's like kind of the same. I had like 3 Spell Pierce and 2 Counterspell instead of 2 and 3, and I had 3 Snapcasters, so I think we were pretty close to the stock core of Miracles already.
So Sam, at this time, did you already pick up the regular Miracles lists that were going around, or were you still on Thopters?
I was still on Thopters, but I was doing the thing where I said, okay, these Miracles cards are really good, and in a Thopters deck, I was probably playing like 2 or 3 Terminus, because really, what's the worst that could happen? You'd attack, they would do something, you Terminus, you make a whole bunch more dudes, and your Terminus doesn't really hurt you that badly. I didn't go full-on Miracles until, as far as the deck's history, quite late.
Interesting. So, would you play the deck strictly blue-red now? Or sorry, blue-white nowadays?
No, I wouldn't. At the time, I felt it's important to have these manlands, and I think they were very good for the time, but obviously today, playing without Red Elemental Blast is just unthinkable. That's the most important splash, and it's not possible, because I guess the meta is even more blue now, and I think we simply want that Red Elemental Blast. It's necessary. Also, the legend rule changed. We want to kill Jace and things like that. Yes.
Agreed. That's also an important consideration. During the middle of this deck's kind of existence, the legend rule changing is quite important.
I totally agree. Like, back then, we didn't even look that deep into splashes. We considered black for, like, having a better matchup against all the mid-range decks for stuff like, I don't know, Perish or Discard against other kind of decks. But I totally agree with Thomas that the meta is so blue these days, and we really want the very good 1 mana destroy anything blue or just counter anything blue. It helps you out a lot. Also, we're seeing more Sneak and Show, so it gives you another out to countering, for example, Show and Tell. So, yeah, that's where I want to be.
Yes, and one more spell you really want to counter with this Red Elemental Blast is Counterbalance. In those days, it wasn't that relevant because there were not that many of them, I would say. You played mostly against Esper, Rak, and so on. But you really, we will talk about later, you want to Counterbalance.
Yeah, and I'm obviously also on the side of like red splash. And looking at my Gantt list, I already had 3 red elemental blast in my sideboard. So
Well, that's why you managed to beat me in the trial.
yeah, that was an amazing game. You were screwing around. I had 3 red elemental blast and 3 snapcaster. Oh,
Yeah,
I
and I
think
couldn't
played
cast
well.
anything because I was
Maybe.
stuck on 2 lands.
Yeah, yeah. So you didn't cast anything, and I had everything. I think I played well. Maybe.
It was kind of funny because it was the second round of the trial, and I had never met Philip before, but we talked a bit on the source. And then for the second round, he sits down and he asks me, "Are you Julian 23?" And I'm like, "Oh, what? Maybe." And then he told me, "There's only one Julian. There's only one Julian who plays miracles." So this goes out to all the players who always think about elves when they hear my name. Back then, it was like, there's only one Julian who plays miracles.
Well,
Times have changed.
Yeah.
so Sam, what are your thoughts? Would you ever go to straight blue-white, or?
I would not go straight to blue-white, but that's more because I'm really greedy. I would be sticking to the red splash, both for the awesomeness that is Red Blast, but the sideboard Blood Moon is just so good against so much of the format that I can't help but have it there.
That's fair enough.
I mean, like,
So-
at GP Jersey, I played a match against Bug where my entire game plan, I actually played one main deck, Blood Moon, at Jersey, where my entire plan against Bug was, like, race this out, and I played against a Bug player who used to be a Miracles player, and he looked at my hand and was like, no, that's a great starting hand, just rush out Blood Moon and I lose the game. It just sucks that I had all the counter spells.
You just have to land it. That's the
It's
main
real strong when you do, though.
So,
But that's not how it works.
so
Exactly.
moving on from history, let's move on to kind of what's going on nowadays. So there seems to be 3 primary builds, as most of us do know. But if you don't, there's a Stoneblade build, which, excuse me, isn't terribly popular. There's the Joe Lisette build that was very popular for a long time with a lot of, especially American players. And as of late, Philip's build, aka the Ponder build, has become extremely popular. So I'd like to talk to everyone about their thoughts on the 3 different builds, kind of what they think. So starting with Tomas, what do you think between the 3 different builds?
I would like to say that I would probably add one more build, which is Rest in Peace, Helm of Obedience.
I usually consider that an older build, but sure. Yeah, let's add that in. So Stoneblade,
Yes,
Rest in Peace,
yes.
Legends.
I'm just saying that that also changes the deck completely. But obviously this is very difficult. Obviously we think the best build is the 4-ponder control version. We think it's the best. I think that Joe Losset is a great player, but I think he's the only one who can play his deck, to be honest. Like with this success.
I agree.
I
I
think.
think Joe is an excellent player, and if he picked up any build, he would do well with it. I just think that maybe perhaps for his testing, and he's very comfortable with it, he ends up doing well.
Yes. I think he was even talking about it. That he was playing against Sneak and Show, and he had that one Venser, and it worked so well. So he kept it, and he had another one, and so on. So I think that he had his own way how to get to this deck. That's this. The thing I don't like very much about the Stoneforge version is that you're not doing anything really well. So you are playing Stoneforge Mystic in the game 1 where they have removal. That's great about our deck, that we blank their removals and possibly we can play it in the sideboard. So I think the 4-ponder build is the best because you really find what you want whenever you need it. The card selection is absolutely fantastic, and if you know how to play with the top, it's just this deck has enough. You know, you winning not because of luck. There is no luck when you're playing Miracles.
So Sam,
That's what I like.
do you agree? Disagree?
I think the primary reason for the Stoneblade, I agree that you kind of weaken yourself by having 2 completely distinct plans. I think the primary advantage of playing these Stoneblade builds is that you're a lot more likely to win quickly, which could mean winning in time, or in a big event, just winning with 10 or 15 minutes into the round so you can use the restroom, grab a drink, etc., is totally relevant. In terms of Legends versus the Ponder builds, I think it's up to personal preference. I like the Legends build for the reason that Joe has said on his stream that he likes it, which is pretty much every card that you draw, you can play and it does something. Whereas with the Ponder build, you draw a Ponder, and what it does is it draws you a different card. So I like the Legends build better because you're doing a little bit more, but I definitely agree that the Ponder list has the ability to be a lot more explosive and powerful.
Julian, what are your thoughts?
Well, I haven't really tried out all the other lists, and I mean, yeah, I think Joe's list overall has more potential to do some air quotes broken stuff, but the 4 Ponder list is just so inherently consistent and strong. It's like, let's call it like an 8 out of 10, and Joe's deck would be like a 9 out of 10. But on the low end, Joe's deck can be even lower than the 4 Ponder list. And by that I mean, I think the variance of how well the deck performs is greater for Joe's deck, whereas the 4 Ponder list is so much more consistent and definitely where I wanna be. And also on top of that, you really can't argue with results. Like what we've seen out of Tomasz and Philip and even Angelo Cadet, you might know, like these guys are doing incredibly well with 4 Ponder and are also almost the sole reason why I pick up the deck every now and then again to just give it a try, because we're just seeing great results. And if you're a competitive player, you can't just turn away and be like, yeah, but that's not what I want to play. You have to at least give it a try, because what we are seeing is absolutely great.
So now, Philip, since you're totally biased in this question, I want you to go over why the other lists are worse than your suggested list, as opposed to saying why yours is better.
That's a good question. So, okay, the Stoneblade list is interesting. Well, some of these like are Stoneblade with Miracles, some are like Miracles with Stoneblade sideboard, but I think you're more like referring to a traditional Miracle build that drops like Entreaty Angels or cuts it to 1 and adds like Mystics mainboard and probably sideboard as well. I've played it like 2 years ago, did fairly well but dropped it as the progress went on, but I played against it at GP New Jersey in the top 8 when I played against Philip Raverman. I mean, he's a good player, obviously, made top 8, so it was a fun match. In the first game, he had Stoneforge Mystic, and I had 8 removal spells in my deck, so take a guess how good this card was. Yep, terrible. Interestingly enough, his sideboard had like more Mystics and a second Battle Skull, and I had access to his deck list. So I actually boarded differently than I would have if I played against like the same 75 that I was playing. So I kept Terminus. So why the story? I obviously won, but I won because I saw his deck list. Would I have won if I had boarded Flusterstorms instead of Terminus? I actually don't think so. So I think the Stoneblade version has the inherently big weakness of having like creatures game 1, which opens your opponent to like use those spells that would have otherwise been somewhat dead. But post-board, Stoneforge and Battleskull is definitely a potent weapon, and if you feel like describing a Miracle build with a lot of Stoneforge and Battleskull in the sideboard, I would actually say it's okay if you like the surprise factor. It's okay if you want big impact cards. It's okay if you wanna feel lucky and draw the right cards in the right matchups, just like Blood Moon. But that's not how it works. But we'll come to that later, I guess. And yeah, Joe's Legends build has the, as said earlier, the most broken stuff, like Clicker Lock, Venza Lock, Blood Moon, whatever. It has everything, but it's also terribly inconsistent, and going less than 4 Swords to Plowshares is still unthinkable for me.
I agree.
Blasphemy.
I totally agree, but continue, sorry.
So like, I've played Legends. I have played my fair share of Legend Miracle back in the day. I've mostly played a list that Angelo sent me. It also had like, what was this blue? I don't remember the name. It kind of it put your opponent's permanent on the top of their deck.
Unexpectedly absent.
It wasn't even blue. Yeah, unexpectedly absent. Yeah, so I played the Legends version with that, and it was okay. But what I really didn't like was I have a hand that's very good against Sneak Show, so I beat Sneak Show. I have a hand that's very good against the Mirror, so I beat the Mirror. But what if I have a hand that's good against Sneak Show and I play against Delva? What if I have a hand like, what if you draw the wrong cards? And that's not what I want from playing competitive Magic. I don't want to have like the right and the wrong cards in my deck. I want my deck to be like 100% the same, being able to find whatever I need. And yeah, whenever you can if you have the choice between like having a hand of lands and swords, or having a hand of lands and spell pierces or counter spells, I would rather have a hand of lands and ponders or brainstorms or whatever. Like, so then I'm not completely dead if my opponent plays something that I didn't expect. And that's what I think is the biggest weakness of Joe's deck, like that it actually draws cards that it doesn't want to.
Fair enough. So, moving on, I'm just going to ask some kind of general questions before we move on to kind of the construction and the matchups and kind of that. All right? So, starting with Sam, question 1. If the Miracle mechanic did not exist, would you still play a countertop deck? And if so, why not? Explain.
Well, as shown by my previous deck history, I definitely would. I would probably be playing either a Helm build, as we've talked about, or a Stoneforge Mystic, or a possibly like Stoneforge Mystic with Batterskull and the Sword of the Meat combo. But I like those kind of decks, and I'm not playing in super high-level competitive events very often, so my opinion's kind of different on that. I'd still think they're good. They're good enough for me to play. Perhaps not, the top of the format if there were no miracles.
Tomas, if the Miracle mechanic did not exist, is countertop still viable?
Somehow it would be viable, but I wouldn't play it probably. I would play something with Stoneforge Mystic and a Thoughtseize and Snapcaster maybe. But because the point is that I love Counterbalance, I think it's terrific and it's fantastic in our deck. But it's because top is very good because of miracles as well. It has so many possibilities you can do with the card. And if you don't have the miracles, it's just not that good. And if you focus on Counterbalance, they have Abrupt Decay, and then Abrupt Decay really shines. It's not so good against us because we can side it out and still have very strong decks. So I wouldn't play.
Okay, Julian?
Well, obviously I'm not playing miracles in tournaments right now, but I also wouldn't think that countertop would be... It would probably be viable, but it wouldn't be a tier 1 strategy, not like the way it used to be in around 2009, 2010. And we went about that earlier, like how it kind of vanished before the miracle mechanic suddenly came up with everything restored. So I think it totally wouldn't be viable because people would revert back to playing these dorky mid-rangey decks like, I don't know, Esper, Stoneblade, and Maverick and stuff. And yeah, so I don't think it would be viable anymore.
Philip?
Yeah, just make it short. I don't think it would be good, and I wouldn't play it because I only play the best deck.
All right. Question 2. If Counterbalance did not exist, would the Miracle deck still be viable? And would you play it? Philip?
I was actually hoping you would ask someone else so I can pull up a list. But anyways, I actually did play Miracles without Counterbalance for some time. If Counterbalance wouldn't exist, I would still play... Well, I would still try to play Miracles. I would have to find out whether it's good enough. I'm actually not sure it would be, but I would definitely give it a try. I think Counterbalance is too important of a card when it comes to dealing with combo decks and control decks and like creating card advantage that it might actually push Miracles off the throne, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, I guess I would actually abandon Miracles if Balance was banned because yeah, it would be bad.
Tomas?
I agree with Philip. The point is that the deck is so perfect that any loss would be just too bad. So I don't think it would be good enough.
Sam?
As I've kind of hinted at, and I wrote most of the earlier questions, I like playing countertop decks, and I play Miracles because it's the best countertop deck. So if Counterbalance didn't exist, it's pretty unlikely that I'd be playing this deck. I'd probably be playing some other really hard control deck, like a straight blue-white Stoneforge Mystic deck.
And Julian?
Yeah, as Philip mentioned, especially for the combo matchup, you really need something that's permanent based. To me, the rule in Legacy is always the slower your deck is, the more you want a permanent that deals with combo. And just having like all these counter spells is probably still going to be too slow to beat combo. So without Counterbalance, you're not in a very good spot, and people probably wouldn't play the deck anywhere as much as they are right now.
Excellent. So we all know that Sensei's Divining Top is banned in Modern, and whether that's for better or for worse is, up for debate. But the time constraints have never been an issue in Legacy and Vintage, apparently. Do you agree or disagree about how much time Top takes to use in tournaments? And do you think Top should be banned? So we're going to start with Julian.
So in 2008, I think it was right before or after PT Elves or PT Berlin, as they called it back then, Top was banned strictly for how did they phrase it? Logistical reasons. And I think that was okay, and I think it would also be okay to ban it in Legacy. If this wasn't to happen, I think the other approach is to really call people out on their slow play. Like if you watch Thomas and Philip, they play at a completely acceptable pace with top for most of the time. At least I've never really seen them like be very slow with it. But when people are frustrated to draw against Miracles, it's partly because they themselves are playing slowly, or because the Miracles player is also doing really slowly with his top. And I think you should consistently like call a judge whenever your opponent goes anywhere near to what you would consider slow play. And I try to watch the clock and call people out like after 30 to 40 seconds. And when you're playing, it feels like not very long. But if you're watching somebody like checking a top for 30 seconds, that's actually quite long. So yeah, I think it would be justifiable to ban top. But if that wasn't to happen, and I think it's not going to happen, we should be much harsher about people, or stricter about people wasting time with it.
Sam?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think we've talked about this before in ban-related episodes. But
Yes, we have.
the idea, we're taking the idea that top is banned in Modern because it takes a long time from the original Modern announcement when Modern was just a community cup, No, when they made Modern a community cup format, they made the first, okay, we're going to try this to see how it works out, before they ever even announced Modern would be a real thing. And they said Sensei's Divining Top takes too long to play with. So the first question is that just not true in Legacy or Vintage? And I think the reality of it is, this is an excellent example of how Wizards cares a lot less about formats that aren't Pro Tour formats. I think that Counterbalance Top but with Counterbalance has the ability to take just as long in Legacy and Vintage as it does in Modern. I do think that if it were banned, it would be completely reasonable. Obviously, I'm not going to crusade for that, but I think it's unfortunate that that is the reason that they gave for the ban, because then without a rules change, it will never be unbanned, and we will never get to see a Counterbalance Top deck in Modern.
Tomas?
Well, I think the card is banned in Modern because it's insanely powerful. That's you can see that when they were starting Modern, maybe they used this as an argument, but then they had to cut all the cantrips that were somehow playable because all the card selection was too powerful. I think the problem with the top and generally with Miracles is I don't think that many players play Miracles. I think because you need to dedicate a lot. I think you have to play it a lot. And one of the reasons is that you get sort of you get automatic with the Sensei top. When I played my first big event with Miracles in Ghent, I had 10 or 9 to 4. I had 4 draws in 2 days of GP, and I think it was certainly because I was not always playing very fast, And in the next GP, I had 3 draws. My first 3 GPs, I had more draws than losses. So I think, and it took like 3 years, And I think now I play really fast, and I almost never get into time. I get to time like once, twice in a year. But in my community in Prague, Czech Republic, everybody says, "Oh, he's the last one playing. Of course, Tomáš, he's the slowest player in the world," and so on. Maybe I used to be, but I'm not anymore. And I think that's the problem with Miracles and Top, is that it takes a long time before you get fast enough with the Top.
Philip?
So, ban Top. Many people would actually like that, I guess. I don't actually think that it should be banned due to time reasons. I could definitely see it being banned because Miracles is hilariously overpowered and better than everything else. But simply from the time perspective, I think as long as the draw doesn't favor the player making the draw, it's actually somewhat okay. So looking at my history at GPs, as far as I can remember from all the 4 GPs I played with Miracles, I drew once, and this was because my opponent felt like he had to hardcast Emrakul, starting with 3 lands. So took him like 15 minutes or something to actually get there. And but I think as long as the draw doesn't favor literally anybody, at GPC it's mostly a loss for both. It shouldn't really be an argument because like Miracles wants to win as well. The other deck wants to win, so if you want to win, you gotta play fast on each side. And I still think, and I know many disagree, if I'm losing and I have the ability to play a game at decent speed, I can actually not win or not lose the last game. So this was seen on my win and in at GP Paris, where I played on camera. I played against Buck Delver, and I easily won the first game because auto win and stuff. And in the second, he just brought like Winter Orb, and I had the ability to like go for Entreaty Angels and hope that he doesn't have anything, and maybe I win. Or I had the option to like, okay, I will just do nothing and wait until you try to kill me. And so I just sat there, drew my cards, passed the turn until you play a creature, and I killed that creature. Well, he didn't manage to kill me in time, so I won like 1-0. And I don't think that anything like this is actually a problem because that's part of the rules right now. I'm obviously a big opponent of slow playing and stalling. So I agree with Julian here that it should be easier for judges to like hand out warnings or game losses, match losses, whatever, for playing slowly again and again. But I don't think that time is actually a consideration for dividing top ban.
I kind of have a point on this as well. Having played Miracles, Junk, Nickfit, all of which have contained Sensei Divining Top, I feel like if you know your deck well enough, and you know what you need to do and what cards you need in particular situations and matchups, I don't think topping needs to take that long. I think physically you can go look at the top 3 cards. 1, 2, 3. Look, rearrange, put them back. And I don't think it should take much longer than that.
Okay, so just one quick note, that's like the time I take for about 3 Divining Top activations. So I think that the time you actually explained is super long. Like, if your opponent takes 4 or 5, maybe 6, 7 seconds for each top, it's getting dangerously close. So I can understand topping at this speed against combo, against, I don't know, something that kills you fast. But if you're playing against a grindy matchup, against anything that doesn't like die fast, you have to be way faster than what you described.
Sure, but I need to be able to verbalize it for the cast, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
You've also made an interesting point that there's not a lot of cards that can do what Sensei's Divining Top does, which is give non-blue decks some form of card selection. Your options are basically Sylvan Library in green and top, and if you remove top, you also significantly weaken non-blue decks at the same time.
I agree. I just feel like people who are perhaps a little bit more shaky with their selections should speed it up in practice.
That's also the argument that Mark Barra-König was making when we were discussing it on another podcast, where I was very much in favor of banning top, and then he brought up that, like, as Sam mentioned, there are a lot of non-blue decks that benefit from top, and maybe something else should go, if something should go in the first place. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting point because stuff like Nickfit really, really benefits from top a lot.
Agreed. So, moving on. How do you construct a Miracles deck list? What goes into constructing a Miracles deck list? Why are cards there and in what numbers? So, I mean, we can pull up kind of any list. I mean, we can pull up... Philip, I'm sure you have your most recent list at your disposal.
Yep.
So, if we were to look at your list, we see cards like Force of Will, we see Swords to Plowshares. Let's just run through the list of cards and explain to viewers perhaps who are newer, like why cards are there and in what number. Is that alright?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Just one thing. My latest list has like one flexible slot.
Sure. I'm just looking at a regular list now, and we'll just kind of talk about it.
Yeah. So basically, when constructing Miracles, I think the goal should be to have as few cards as possible that do something, and fill it up with as much. Some would call it air. I would call it cantrips as you can. So you want to have the highest impact and the best cards for each scenario, but you want to have as little as possible. So if it was possible to construct a Miracle deck with just one Raging Goblin as a win condition, I will play just one Raging Goblin as a win condition. So you're actually trying to minimize the cards you have to play at the top level, to play without hindering yourself. So what you basically see is you see between 4 and 5 win conditions. That's typically 2 Entreaty Angels and 2 or 3 Chase the Mind Sculptor. We are currently going down to 2 Entreat and 2 Chase, because we are still feeling that we are winning as many matches as we did with 3 Chase, but cutting 1 Chase and it was dig through time this time, it's just the way I construct or reconstruct Miracle decks. It's just like minimizing the cards you actually need and filling it up with as much cards that do something against everything. Like Ponder is never dead, basically. Or Brainstorm for that matter.
Sure, so some of the selections are more obvious. So for Brainstorm, obviously something we want. For Force of Will, obviously something we want.
No.
Really?
That's funny that you bring that up, because that's actually the flexible slot in the most recent list, and I know Tomasz would prefer to present the list with 4 Force of Will here. Am I right?
Yes, I think it's better because we always played Force of Will, and now we are thinking about not playing. So I think it would be just too confusing.
Okay, yeah, let's keep it at 4 Force of Will for now. Maybe we can add it later.
Yeah, let's talk about a more general list. Like, we're trying to explain the archetype.
Yeah, okay, so basically you want 4 Force for Brainstorm for top. You also want 4 Counterbalance, unless the metagame dictates something different, but it doesn't. You also want 4 Swords to Plowshares and 4 Terminus, so you can kill stuff. Okay, I'm sorry, that was maybe too fast. So, 4 Ponder, for Brainstorm for top are there so you can find stuff. So you can find whatever you need. If you draw these cards in any matchup, you will just cast them and see what's there in your deck. So what these cards do is basically they remove the importance of your starting hand. If you open your hand, it doesn't really matter what you're playing against, because it will mostly be lands and cantrips. So you'll find what you need. This has the downside of being a little slow, maybe. That's why we can't play Spell Pierce. But it also has the upside of you don't have a bad hand against a bad deck. You don't have a good hand against a bad deck. Like, you always do something. And then you kind of breach out into the blue and the white half of your deck. The blue half is 4 Force and 4 Counterbalance. I heard it's pretty good against combo. And also control for that matter. And the other white half is basically 4 Swords and 4 Terminus. I couldn't see going less than 4/4 on these two, because Legacy is still a format of creatures. Ridiculously overpowered ones are that kill you quickly or generate way too much advantage. So you need those. And then you're basically a few slots left that you have to dictate on win conditions. So 2 Entreat and 2 Chase is the minimum that you can play based on our experience. And then you have a few slots left, and I decided to go for 3 Snapcaster, 2 Dig Through Time and 1 Counterspell, and 1 Countess Judgment. So basically, these are cards that are good against most cards in Legacy. Like Countess Judgment can hit like nearly everything but lands, and Counterspell counters everything but lands, so they have a wide range of options, and Dig Through Time is just super cantrip, kind of.
So, before lists used to play 3 Counterspell, now they seem to be down to 2/1 Counterspell. What are your thoughts on that, Tomas?
Well, that's if we should speak about that extra slot we have, that would be another counterspell. So we would come back to 2 counterspells main deck. But so far as the list is 1 counterspell main deck, 1 counterspell sideboard. I think it's perfect. Basically, we could cut Dig Through Time to add some counterspell. That would be possible, or that Force of Will. But I think as it is, it's really perfect and well balanced. So I'm happy with 1 counterspell main deck and 1 in this board.
Now, some lists also cut down on Snapcasters for a while, and now we seem to be back up to 3.
I think that's for me, Snapcaster is one of the best cards in the deck. Obviously, all cards are fantastic, but Snapcaster allows us to do absolutely terrific things. It's just amazing. You know, it allows us to beat 12 post. You just play a turn 2 and you attack. And I just love the card. It's one of my favorite cards, and it's just amazing. So I think a Snapcaster is very important. And often when you counter lock him, it's often win con. You just play Snapcaster and you kill him in 6 attacks or 7 attacks. So Snapcaster is absolutely fantastic. And we were talking with Philip that if we could add any card in the deck, it would be Snapcaster to 4. But there is no space.
Julian?
Yeah, because sorry?
I was going to say Julian.
Yeah.
For me, the really interesting part about the new list, and I'm sure we'll later cover that, is in the sideboard there's 2 Rest in Peace, and that made me wonder whether or how that interacts with dig through time. Like, I mean, against a deck like Bug Diver, I know there's like the sideboard plan of either sideboarding out all counterbalances, not bringing in Rest in Peace, or bringing in Rest in Peace and keeping the counterbalances. But I can also see dig through time being very good against, say, Bug Diver. So that's the part that really caught my interest.
Yes, I'm sorry if I can answer this very quick. Basically, we are not bringing Rest in Peace against Bug Delver anyway, because we think Snapcaster is very powerful, so that's not a problem. We basically have Rest in Peace against like special decks. We bring it against Jant, and we bring it because it hits many cards there, and we certainly bring it against some dedicated graveyard strategies. But this is one of those 2 cards in the board which are possible to be dropped. But we are so far we're happy with the 2 Rest in Peace, because if you have it against the right deck, it's amazing.
Philip, how do you feel about Dig Through Time?
Yeah, so Dig Through Time. Back when we went on our journey to the US, we stopped at Prague, and a good friend of Tomasz, he was like, you gotta play more Dig Through Time, and we were like, no, 3 Jays is perfect, it doesn't really matter, but we think 3 Jays is better, and we played 3 Jays, and we won like close to everything we did, but I still think we were wrong. Dig Through Time is basically a super cantrip, like it's no win condition, but it's a super cantrip, and what it essentially does better than Jays is like allowing you to keep up your mana, keep up whatever you do without tapping out for a 4-drop. So it's basically worse against everything that like attacks you, like Stoneblade, any non-blue deck, but it's incredibly important in the mirror match. It's super important against combo where you really don't want to tap out because you have like Flusterstorm in your hand and stuff, so you need like 7 mana before you can cast Chase. It's super good against Infect because that's a bad matchup or something. I don't know, maybe. Like it's good against this. Good against the matchups where you kind of aren't the favorite because you can't be a favorite in the mirror match. You can't be a favorite against Infect, and combo is also pretty tough game 1 because you have like 4/4s and a few counterbalances, and sometimes they're pretty bad against Untitled. So what Dig Through Time basically does is hedges a little bit against the fast attacks. It's also pretty good against Delver because you can easily play around Spell Piercing Days, which you cannot really do when your game plan is Chase, which gets hit by Lightning Bolt.
Philip, man, I'm stunned. You totally forgot to mention the biggest advantage and upside of Dig Through Time.
It counters opposing Dig Through Times?
It counters Charterhoof Behemoth. And that has happened enough times by now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've had it come up like 2 or 3 times, and that's too much for me.
Sam, what are your thoughts on Dig?
I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it because, obviously it's really good to see that many cards, but especially if you're going to play like a Ponder version where you're going to have 4 Ponders, 4 Brainstorm, 4 Top, Snapcasters bringing back some of those cards, Jaces, you're going to see so much of your deck. I'm not sure that the Dig really adds enough to it.
That's a fair assessment.
But yes, I understand. But I think great thing is that you can Snapcaster that Dig Through Time.
That's true. This is one of the few decks that can afford to do that.
So looking at the land base, we'll notice that there's usually the average land base looks like 3 Tundra, 2 Volk, 4 Island, 2 Plains, 4 Skulling Tarn, 4 Flooded Strand, and 2 Arid Mesa. So for the people who say 21 lands is too few for a control deck, Philip, what is your response?
I did not do the math, but there's one thing that Julian said earlier, you can't argue with the results. The amount of winning that Tomasz, and Angelo did, like, if it was too few, we wouldn't be winning. I don't know what else I can tell you. I really don't.
Would you say that the land count is too few if, say, there were no Ponder in the deck? 21 lands?
Oh, yeah, that would be suicidal. That would be unplayable, but the amount of cantrips and 21 lands has worked out perfectly. And I said earlier, we want to play as little cards of each characteristics as possible, and this is like we want to play as few lands as possible, and 21 is for what we think right now the best number.
Tomas?
Yes, I agree with Philip. We sometimes cannot agree what is the keeper, one land and what, but luckily this deck, your hand looks like fetch land, like a blue fetch land, ponder top or something like that, and some other cards, and this is keeper, even for if you control deck and you must not miss your land drops. So I'm really happy with the 21 lands, and I think it's the perfect number. And we've been playing 21 lands for quite a long time now. I think maybe 2 years.
Sam, your thoughts on the land count?
I think 21 is probably too few for Legends builds, but in the Ponder decks, I kind of find it interesting that people are making this argument, because the idea of essentially replacing lands with a bunch of cantrips is really old. Essentially, you're talking about the Xerox principle, which I just Googled and I found an article from 2005 that says, quote, for every 4 1-2 mana cantrips, you can remove 2 lands. And that's essentially what you've done here, is by adding these ponders, and then you've also got your brainstorms and your top kind accounts. I totally get why you would only run 21 lands, and I find it really interesting that such an old concept, there are people who still want more lands in a deck that's cantripping as much as Ponder Miracles is cantripping.
Julian?
Well, I think, as Philip said, you can't argue with the results. If it actually was an issue, what do I say? Philip and Tomasz would probably adjust the deck list. So I don't think there's a problem with that. If you personally feel like you're not drawing enough lands, you first of all have to ask yourself, are you playing enough? Like, if you're only playing very few matches with the deck, variance is going to hit much harder than it will, like, if you were to play, let's say, 50 matches a month or something.
You could also argue, like, insufficient shuffling, your sleeves, whatever. There's a bunch of different factors. I would say trying it online, which I think that's where you're going to see, because you can play so many more games, might be the place where you can actually flesh out how many lands you actually want to have.
I do want to point out real quick, actually looking a little further into this, the idea of Xerox in decks starts in 1997.
Dear Lord.
So this is quite an old idea.
Good to know. So
I was like 3 years back then.
I think we could talk about sideboards for a while, so I think I actually kind of want to move away from that and talk about that when we talk about matchups. So Philip brought up a good point before the cast, is talking about what's a mulligan and what's a keep. So Philip, do you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, that's one of the few topics that I and Tomasz can't really agree on most parts, because what I think about mulliganing and keeping is very, very simple. And it's just don't mulligan if you have a land. And now some random guy will come up and tell me, what if you have plains and triple ponder? Okay, then you mulligan. But as soon as you can cast your first ponder brainstorm on top, you just don't mulligan. Like, at all. If you have like Tundra, Ponder, and 5 Miracles, maybe. But if you have Tundra, Ponder, and 3 Miracles, and 2 random cards, keep it. Just do.
Tomas?
Yes, because the point is that when we were talking about enough lands, imagine you have top, basic, and fetch land. This is whatever is the rest. This is already perfect, because you play top, you look in your upkeep, you draw cards, whatever it is, then you play fetch land, then you look again, and if you don't like it, you can fetch and look again. So you see awful lot of cards in just the opening rounds, and that is perfect. But the trouble is, and that's what we can't agree on with Philip, is that will you keep land and top and random cards? No cantrips. And I don't keep this.
And I keep every single one of them.
Yes, I wouldn't keep it, because you play top, and then will you look in upkeep? If there is no land, you are just so screwed. So I don't think this is worth the risk. On the other hand, if you have top and 6 lands and you don't play, and there are some fetch lands probably, I think this is all right.
Sam?
I mean,
I'm pretty much agreed on the idea that if you have enough cantrips and the mana to cast them, it doesn't really matter if you don't have the stuff you want to do, because you're going to find that stuff really early. Obviously, sideboard games, that's a little different, but like they're saying, if you have a top and a couple lands or a couple ponders and a couple islands, you're going to find everything else you need, which also means you're going to keep a lot of opening 7s.
Philip?
So take a guess how often I mulliganed at GP New Jersey.
0.
At the whole... I didn't mulligan a single time in day 1, day 2, and top 8. I mulliganed once at GP Paris. But this was just like 7 non-lands.
Which is kind of funny.
Or 7 lands.
Even though it was GP Paris, your money gun only once. I think this only Sam, Thomas, and Matt will understand.
The old Paris mulligans, sir.
No, I just wanted to say that here in Miracles, the mulliganing is actually relatively simple. We can discuss this one land top, hand, but otherwise, basically, almost everything else is a keeper. I must say, since I'm so much like a miracle guy, when I play some other formats, I don't realize that you have to sometimes mulligan hands because you need some cards in the opening hand. I'm not sure if you understand what I mean. I just see spells and lands, and I'm like, okay, let's play it out. And in Miracles, it works because you always find what you want, but it doesn't work with some other decks. So this is, I must say, it's almost not magic as magic.
That's what
I've
been saying for a long time.
I'm having the very same experience right now testing for the Pro Tour. Like, I should keep this in Miracles, I guess. So I do. Oh wait, I lose now. Maybe I should have mulligan. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's why I'm sorry. That's why I said before that with Miracles, if you're winning, it's not really like luck. It's just there. You have the choices, and if you choose the right choices, you win. But you don't have it with other maybe formats and with other decks. That's why I like Legacy so much.
Perfect. So, moving on, there are some things called matchups. Excuse me, that we'd like to go over. So, if you, I'm kind of looking at the decks to beat, and kind of what we should talk about and the relevant matchups. There are hundreds of decks in Legacy. There are 10 that are really good. There are probably another 10 to 20 that are fine, and then there's a lot of stuff that you might see once in a while. So, top decks as of right now, looking in the deck to beat section of MTG The Source, are Miracles, Death and Taxes, OmniTell, Blade, Elves, Ant, Team America, Rug Delver. If we go to MTG Top 8, you'll see that Grixis has been putting up results, and there's a few other lists in there. So, let's kind of go over them one by one and kind of discuss maybe the matchups, how they kind of flush out, how they play out, who's favored, what cards would you want in a sideboard against these matchups, what would you want to bring out, what cards are bad, etc. How does that sound, guys?
Perfect.
Sure.
So, first we'll start with the most awkward one, the Miracle Mirror. So
That's my favorite.
So starting with Tomas.
Yeah, please take Tomas, not me. I never been in a mirror match.
What are the good cards to see? What are you trying to do in the mirror?
Well, in the mirror, it's simple. You want to resolve counterbalance, and you want to prevent your opponent from having counterbalance. That card is just the most important card, and everything else is not so relevant. So you can hear that top is important and so on, but actually, especially after the sideboard, all cards are very good, all of them. So most important for me is counterbalance. So when it comes to in the first game, it's difficult because if you draw too many white cards, you probably lose. After sideboard, I really like the matchup very much because it's very skill intensive, and I must say most players don't really know what to do. So I told you most important is to resolve counterbalance. Second very important thing is don't counter top. You almost never want to counter it, in my opinion, because you have to save the counters for other cards. And when it comes to sideboarding, you want to side out all the white cards, basically. Sometimes we can discuss whether you want to keep one entry or not. It depends how your sideboard looks like. And you can side out maybe planes or even 2 planes you can side out because you don't really need it. You don't have to worry about wasteland. So basically you want to be fetching for the dual lands. So just starting with dual land and ponder or something like that is pretty good. And red elemental blast is the card you really control the matchup. You prevent his counterbalance from resolving and so on. So that's about the matchup. I'm not sure if there's anything I forgot.
Not really. You mentioned the most important stuff. Super important is don't counter top. That's like people. I mean, if you're Daze and spell piece a top, I mean, won't happen in the mirror with Daze, but if you counter a top, if you force a top, it's so bad. 9 out of 10 times, it's unbelievable. Anyways, back to the mirror match. You mentioned that counterbalance is key. That's super true. Don't counter top. When it comes to sideboarding, you really want to cut on the planes. I'm currently cutting both planes because they don't really do anything besides activating top, basically. You don't want white cards, but there can be an argument, but you can make an argument for keeping Council's Judgment. This really does depend on your very configuration of the sideboard. Sometimes you can afford to keep 1 and treat. With some sideboards you just can't. Additionally, it comes down to which variant you're playing against. If you're playing against like 4 Ponder Miracles, the good list with the good sideboard, kind of, you don't really want to treat because we are bringing like 2, maybe even 3 Flusterstorms, and you don't want to fight a deck with Flusterstorms with Entreaty Angels. But when you move into like Stoneblade Miracles, or if you suspect that your opponent will bring like Batterskull and Stoneforge Mystics, you really, really want to keep at least 1 Entreat in your deck so you can deal with that. So you really gotta take a close look game 1, like what variant are they playing. Is it like Ponder, or they have like 1 Caracas, or whatever the indications are? You have to like think about what you're playing against when doing the boarding.
Yes, I would say the most potent weapon in the mirror is the Stoneforge Mystic, because that's the card we can't answer it with Red Elemental Blast. Otherwise, we can answer everything with Red Elemental Blast, and he can drop it as soon as turn 2. So it can be very dangerous. Depends how many he has. If he only has 2, you can maybe even leave the white cards except for Council Judgment out, and you will still somehow deal with it. You will somehow champ and maybe bounce it with Jace. But if he has more, you probably need to keep some Terminus in the deck, probably.
Yeah, I find it interesting. So you're saying don't countertop, which I disagree with a little bit. I kind of think it depends on where you are in the game. Can we talk a little bit about?
Totally.
So we've talked about we countertop or we don't countertop and we want to counterbalance. Can we talk a little bit about the middle of the game when maybe they've got a counterbalance in the top and you've got a counterbalance in the top, and how do you break through that and secure your win, I guess?
Oh, well, obviously it's after the board, so you have some cards. You have Engineered Explosives, you have Council's Judgment. So there are your answers how you can destroy his counterbalance. Usually you try to play Vendilion Click. At the end of turn, it's quite likely he won't have something for 3 on top. You can see his hand, you can take something from it, and you can actually kill him with Vendilion Click. And he might not be able to kill it because presume you have something for 1 and 2 on top. He has for 1 and 2 on top. So that's the way. When you both have counterbalance, Force of Will is getting extremely powerful because that's one of the few spells that still does something. So you can stop his crucial spell. And basically my suggestion when you are in this position, you want to find Council's Judgment, Vendilion Click, you want to find Dig Through Time or Jace, or some answer for his counterbalance. That's the idea.
From a strategic point of view, you want to do something at the end of your opponent's turn, make them believe it's important, make them believe the Snapcaster and Brainstorm is super important, make them tap out as much as they can, then untap and fight about their stuff with what you got left. If you don't have anything, well, then you're gonna keep stalling, but that's what you kind of want to do. You want to start with Click maybe, Snapcaster, Brainstorm, things that aren't relevant when it comes to dealing with counterbalance, but that are important enough to make him do something, make him spend his mana on spinning, make him cast his counterspell or whatever.
And you make a really interesting point there about kind of putting things out there to make them exhaust their resources. And I know I've won a lot of games in the mirror match where you just kind of play a 1, they counter it. Okay, play a 2. All right, I'll tap, spin. Okay, I counter it. Okay, play a 1 again. All right, tap, spin, I'll counter it until, they have no mana left and okay, here's my threat. You're bummed. Yeah, exactly.
And that's what. Sorry.
I know one example I've had of that is if you have somehow confirmed that they don't have a 1 directly on top of their deck, and they say fetch at the end of the turn. Go, all right, I'll red blast your counterbalance. So either you can lose your counterbalance or you can lose your top. And I think there's a lot of plays in the mirror match, like we said. There's a lot of stuff where you just kind of have to find a very tiny chink in their armor, and that's what can get you through to finish out the game.
That's exactly
I
how
absolutely-
I lost my counterbalance yesterday against Joe Lossett when I played Miracles or Magic Online. He got me that way.
Yes, but that's something we can't talk about. All of these little things you have to play, and you have to somehow get used to it. But yes, I really agree. And by the way, I agree with you, Matt. That's why we say don't counter top, because you don't have enough resources to counter all the other things that actually really matter.
Okay.
So you can let him keep top, and you can counter all the spells that matter. Especially after sideboard, he will only draw cards that matter even without top. So I think that's how I would see it.
So do we feel comfortable in having discussed the mirror?
I'm good. I'm ready to move to the next one.
Elves.
Yes, I think.
Julian, what is your take on the matchup from the elves' perspective?
Get wrecked,
Well, it kind of
nerd.
sucks. I mean, even though it sucks because it's a pain in the ass to play against, it's actually not as bad as I might sometimes make it seem. Like, you can definitely get away with like beating them rather often, but yeah, the thing is, it's you have to make a general decision. Do you want to play it like grindy, or are you just trying to go for the win as soon as possible? And yeah,
What do you find wins more often?
Pre-board, it's always trying to go for it as soon as possible, because you can't really expect to win the long game, because you only have like one card that beats Counterbalance, and that's kind of shaky. Post-board, I really like the grindy approach. Like, in the past, I used to side out all Glimpse and rely on Natural Order. Things have changed. I now side out all Natural Order, and sometimes even two Senate, even though they're pretty good against them. But because of stuff like Containment Priest and Grafdigger's Cage, which Philip and Tomasz actually aren't playing right now, so maybe the Senate stay at 4 again. Now I'm going more for the grindy approach. So if you want to grind them out, having a card like Natural Order is just like boom or bust. I've had the experience that when you go for Natural Order, and it either resolves and then they handle whatever you get, or they counter it, you're falling significantly behind by basically tapping out on your main phase. And that's like contradictive to playing a grindy approach. So for now, I'm siding in like 2 Pithing Needles and a Nilrods, and yeah, I also have four chokes, which are really not intended for a Miracles matchup. Like, I've lost my fair share of games against Miracles where they went like, yeah, okay, you got choke. Use top with my broad planes, terminus with my planes, lose an island every now and then, and eventually kill choke and kill you. So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
more
agree.
like splash damage against them. But since this isn't like an Elves episode, I think we should like look more onto it from the Miracles side of things.
So, Tomas, how do you feel about this matchup?
I think it's like 97% for Miracles. No.
It's kind of telling that
I think
is laughing now.
I must say that Julian is obviously one of the best elf players I know, and it's always great to play against him. And I'm not saying it's like I didn't say it's 100%, but I think it's so good for Miracles.
Well, I guess it's
That,
possible, like, it's not 100, because, like, you could have a stroke while you're playing, right? And
I think
you
that's
can't
not
finish
part
the
of the
match.
game rules.
No, but I mean, in the first game, he has to really go for fast one. But it's difficult because if he goes natural order, you force it. Or I'm not talking that you have top and floating terminus, which is something they just can't beat. Okay. In
I
the
did.
second game is bit.
Sorry.
Of course you did. Of course you did. I know, but I'm not sure who was the player. And in the second game, it's obviously more tricky because they have maybe Pithing Needle for your top, which is tough. They have discard. They might have choke. They have some other cards, but you also have when we were in America, we had Containment Priest, which we obviously didn't play because of Elves, because Elves is already a very good matchup. But it had such a powerful splash damage against this deck. It was just unbelievable. And I remember we played Julian in that daily in Brooklyn.
Oh yeah, at the shop.
And yes, at the shop, and I won 2-1, but Julian beat me with Pendelhaven in the second game. I just couldn't beat the card because he only had one elf every time. He decayed all my counterbalances, and then he had 2-3 attacker, and I couldn't because that's amazing. He's attacking with elves. You Swords to Plowshares, Snapcaster, Swords to Plowshares, block, and he has nothing, and you don't even need Terminus. So just want to make it short. I think it's a terrific matchup, and if you play correctly, it's very, very hard to lose, I would say. So this is really nightmare for elf.
I agree. Like, I think the natural order plan is hard to push because you lose a guy, and if it doesn't resolve, you're so far behind. It's different, like, because I think in show and tell matchups you can sometimes just play show and tell, and hopefully your opponent counters it, and you can have a blank show and tell to draw counter spells. But with natural order, it's not like you can just go natural order. I don't sacrifice a guy until it resolves or something. I think there's more play there, but that's not the case.
Yes, and the problem with natural order is that you can have force on some counter, or counterbalance with Jace on top, or just top and a Terminus on top, and even if it resolves, you're still killing him.
Yep. Philip?
Yeah, let's keep it short. It's super easy.
Sam?
I have one question because there is a few problematic cards that elves can still beat miracles with. What is the number one threat that you are focused on, like using your Swords to Plowshares on, rather than waiting for them to build up a team and Terminus? What's the one thing you definitely kill on the spot?
Can I take a guess?
Yeah.
I don't think they would kill it on the spot, but every time I play, it feels like the good Miracles players really want to Swords to Plowshares my Dryad Arbor, because that's the most pesky, annoying creature in the deck.
Well, because it keeps coming back with Terminus.
Yes, it does coming back, but I think another card would be Wirewood Symbiote.
Yeah, that was my guess.
Yeah, these two, basically.
I was going to say Symbiote is the number one for their combo matchup, and then I will frequently also end up swordsing, maybe a little later, not just on the spot, but Deathrite Shaman, because you might spend a lot more time than you expected trying to find your answer, and in that time they could have done a lot of two damage at a time to you.
Okay.
So, do we feel good moving on?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Death and Taxes, starting with Philip.
Death and Taxes is interesting. It's not as easy as the most matchups in Legacy are. It's what I don't like about Death and Taxes is that it brings the variance factor that we try to ignore or mitigate as much as we can with camps and stuff. It brings it back to the table because they got turn one. If a while, do we have force or not? That's basically two different games. You have to game against Death and Taxes when they have If a while, and you have to game against Death and Taxes when they don't have If a while. If they don't have If a while, you're actually playing against. I know people would hate me for it. Mono White Weenie. It's super easy. They can't do anything. They're losing to everything, and yeah, it's a very good matchup if they don't have If a while. But if they have If a while, it's getting incredibly difficult to maneuver around it. Having If a while allows them to mess with our mana with Wasteland and Richard on board. It allows them to do all these dirty tricks with Flicker Wisp and stuff. So if they have If a while, it's definitely a very hard matchup. It's probably even favoring against Miracles if they actually do manage to resolve one.
So, Sam, what are your thoughts?
Like you've kind of implied, I think it's a really weird matchup. You definitely, you want to counter the turn one Aether Vial if they have it, but they've got so many plans of attack that it's hard to just say this is how you play this matchup. Generally, for me at least, it's find their biggest threats and eliminate them. Don't let them get a Batter Skull into play because the game is going to go long. They're going to be able to bounce it, replay it. But I can't speak a whole lot on this matchup just because there are so many ways that it could go that it's hard to just give generalized rules for this matchup.
Tomas?
Yeah, one thing if I may, I'm sorry. I played against Mikkel Bonda back at one of the Bastard Moxons, and I won more games than he expected me to, and his remark from the Death and Taxes side was, you play more patiently than most Miracle players. So what he kind of saw when we facing this matchup was that I would let him beat me down as low as possible before pulling the trigger on Terminus. Yeah.
You force him in. You're forcing him into an increasingly awkward position as he has to overextend into that Terminus.
Yeah, and I'm also not terminusing when I can, so because I'm terminusing when I have to. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the difference here.
Tomas?
I think the most important thing in this matchup is, and obviously it plays some role with the other matchups, but I think it's extremely big in this one, and that's how good is the player. because I don't really know many very, very good Death and Taxes players. It seems to me that in Death and Taxes, if you make like small mistake, you blow it away and you can't come back, you know. Well, here you can always have terminus or something like that, and you can somehow come back to the game, but not so much with Death and Taxes, in my opinion. So it's very important how good is the player, how can he use his Rishadan port, how he can really make your life miserable. I agree with Philip that top is very important card. But again, it depends how they use it. Basically, you want to play your top, you want to keep on land drops, you try to prevent him from getting sort of fire and ice, because that's a threat. The other equipments are not so bad, because they just swing, they just deal damage, but that one draws in cards. So you want to prevent him from that. You want to be aware of Mother of Runes, but it's okay, because after first Terminus, your Swords to Plowshares suddenly mean a lot. And then you have enough land, you go for Entreat, and they usually can't do anything about it, and just kill them. That's at least my experience. So I think I always would like to play this matchup for Miracles, but it's one of those difficult matchups, particularly if your opponent know what is he doing, and if he's packing Cataclysm. I hate that card.
Julian?
That's why we have to keep Force of Will after sideboard in this matchup, just because of Cataclysm, because that card just kills us and there is no comeback.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about, like the beauty of the card Cataclysm, because it like forces a kind of strategic shift for Miracles. Like now they really have to keep in the Forcifiers, because otherwise they will be blown out by Cataclysm. That also destroys Chase. So yeah, that's like from an outside viewer, that's always like what's super interesting to me, to see how people sideboard.
So, what are the best cards to bring in or to have in your sideboard against Death and Taxes? So, Philip?
The best card basically is one of my all-time favorites, but we sadly cannot play it. Self-Elemental. I really love the card. I board it against everything, against Threshold, against Miracles combo. But yeah, the cards we kind of want is Explosives, Judgment, and Wear. That's like, we want to deal with as many things that's like artifact-based as possible, while still having applications against creatures if we need to, like Explosives and Judgment. They're basically there to deal with Evil Violent equipment, but if we are in a hinge, we can still like kill creatures with it. So yeah, our standard sideboard doesn't really have anything good against Death and Taxes. We just have this one Explosives, one Disenchant, and one Judgment, because they're good against pretty much everything. But yeah.
Julian, do you want to list some cards that are good against Miracles from the Death and Taxes perspective? Besides Cataclysm.
What I kind of like is when they have like Ratchet Bomb, and you can spot a player who is very aware of what's going on in the game when he just randomly plays a Ratchet Bomb on an empty board, because he knows that end of turn Entreat the Angels is an actual threat that might kill him. So sometimes people just play it and put it to 2 to kill Counterbalance when they don't even realize that Miracles would probably side out Counterbalance. But just playing it on an empty board for 0, when the opponent could, like over the course of the next couple of turns, be going for Terminus, for Entreat the Angels, is like a sign that you're really aware of what's going on, and that's something that people should like look into. Like, am I going to die to Entreat the Angels over the next couple of turns, and is this a good spot to resolve Ratchet Bomb?
I agree. It puts them down. It puts the Miracles player down an alley where they're not able to entreat if they don't have, say, Disenchant for that Explosives, and it puts them on, say, Jace or something else, which is a much easier plan of attack, especially for the Death and Taxes player to try and deal with. Tomas?
Well, I agree with everything that has been said. Yes, I think it's clear with the sideboarding. I also love Sulfur Elemental. That's an amazing card. But I want to say that obviously it can be tough. I'm not saying we always draw perfectly. You know, they can Pithing Needle the top, and suddenly we are in a very, very hard spot. They can destroy some of our lands. I think or we just slam Jace. They have Vial on 2. You brainstorm and they put Spirit of the Labyrinth. So there are some nightmare situations in this matchup, and it's certainly very interesting.
Sam?
Sideboard still, yeah.
Yeah.
Wear Tear is, I think, the big one that I would be playing. If you have clicks that are not main, that's another one that could be really good, because like I said, keeping them from having an equipment is it's not going to win you the game, but it's going to keep you from losing the game quickly. Other than that, you're probably pulling out so much stuff. You kind of got to put a lot of stuff in for just value, additional removal or sweepers if that's in your board. But as I said, it's such a weird game plan. A lot of times I just have to kind of gut feeling what I want to play against Death and Taxes, because there's so many different ways to build that deck that you might be playing against something that's very different than the stock list. Like you might be playing against someone who's still got Mangara.
Just one thing. Now in our list, we actually don't play Wear Tear because we have only 2 Volcanics. And against decks like Death and Taxes, it can be really tricky to have just 2 Volcanics. So we have Disenchant. There's a fringe thing that you can kill Spirit of a Labyrinth with Wear Tear. So you can destroy Artifact. That's actually why we are bringing it. And by the way, you can do that. But Disenchant seems overall better if you only have 2 Volcanics.
Excellent. So, moving on. Mono Blue OmniTell.
That's basically, I think Mono Blue OmniTell is the second best deck in Legacy right now. It's been pretty good when Treasure Cruise was around. Now Treasure Cruise is gone. Now mainboard Red Blasts are gone, but they still have Dig Through Time. So this deck is insanely powerful right now. And if Miracles wasn't a thing, I would actually play that because it's just so good against most things. The games against Miracles are pretty boring, to be perfectly honest. It's just they cantrip, they cast a Show and Tell, you show them what you've got. If they've got more than you, you lose. It's frustrating to play against it. It's boring, but it's incredibly good. And your game plan on game 1 is just hope that I don't have a good hand and that Counterbalance locks them from their cantrips, because you just don't have enough pressure to force them to going into the combo early, and you don't have enough permission to win the long fight if they have 4 Dig Through Time, which they're resolving again and again and again. It gets way better post board when you have like 3 Red Blasts, 3 Flusterstorms, and Vendilion Clicks that provide the pressure needed. So yeah, pre-board is pretty bad and post board is getting really good.
Julian.
And you...
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. And you really want to bring things that deal with defense grid, because you don't want to get caught without any answer in the deck. So yeah.
Yeah, so I totally agree with Philip that Mono Blue OmniTell, first of all, is the very best way to build OmniTell or any kind of sneak and show these days. And second of all, that is like probably the second best deck in Legacy. At least on Magic Online, we've been seeing it a lot. And it's mostly the Soul Sneak and Show, or the Soul Show and Tell deck that actually wins a lot these days. What's interesting to me is that because of what the meta looks right now, we don't really see a lot of Wastelands. Like, speaking from the Magic Online perspective, Grixis Delver or Grixis Pyromancer is a deck that's played a lot that usually doesn't play Wasteland. And it also, outside of 4 Therapies, attacks with mostly Flusterstorms and Force of Wills and what have you. And because of that, Mono Blue OmniTell these days usually plays Bosichu. Like, they sometimes play Bosichu in the main, or at least play additional copies after sideboarding. So that's why I think it's kind of interesting that Philip says that the matchup gets better after sideboarding. Because those OmniTell people, they were aware that there's Flusterstorm and there's more Red Elemental Blast. So they probably can't really win enough games to justify, like, trying to win against counters. So they're incorporating Bosichu these days. And it would be interesting for me to hear from you guys what you think about that. And, well, I mean, obviously it's very fringe. The deck is not played a lot in paper, and not everybody's adopting Bosichu, so I don't think you would, like, put a dedicated hate for Bosichu in the sideboard. But how would you approach the overall matchup if you know that your opponent has access to Bosichu? And for everybody listening who doesn't know what Bosichu is, it's a land that comes into play tapped. And when you tap it for mana, you lose 2 life, or you pay 2 life. And the next, or the instant or sorcery that you play with it is uncounterable.
Yes, Angelo Cadei, our friend from Italy, who's also playing Miracles, he told me that a lot of people were packing this, even in Sneak and Show, just to battle him, because he always beat them, even though it's supposed to be a bad matchup. I must say, when they have Boseju in that Omniscience, even if they resolve that Show and Tell and they put Omniscience into play, which is obviously very powerful, it's still not the end of the world, because your hand is probably full of counters, and you can, I don't know, disenchant in response. I'm not sure. I think you can still play. You can blast it in the response or something. You can destroy it. So I think you can still have the game. I think the more problem is, but obviously it's much more unstable if they have uncountable show and tell, and they put sneak attack, and they put the Grizzlebrand or Emrakul into play, and they attack you. I think this is really, that absolutely kills us, and we can't come back from it. But I think against Omniscience, Mono Blue, I think it's not auto loss, but it's auto loss if they do what I've just described. So it's difficult. If I see they have it, I probably focus and I try to counter their cantrips or something like that. Especially against sneak attack and against Omniscience, Mono Blue, I think we still have the game even if they resolve show and tell. Maybe I'm missing something.
There's, based on my experience, there's like two ways you can approach this matchup, and this really depends on when you know that they're having Boseiju. If you like, you know them personally, you know the list, you know that they have like 3 or maybe even 4 Boseiju post board, then you have the option of going like all aggro, but you really have to do this while you can't just counter brace them here and there. If you decide to like say, I don't fight over show and tell, I'm like beating down, you really have to counter all the cantrips and stuff, and you have to like Snapcaster and Ponder if you don't have anything to do, because you need this pressure going. You need Click and Snapcaster to start bringing the beats. But if you don't know whether they're playing Boseiju, and this is the typical tournament settings, that this is how I would approach in like a GP or something, I would actually do what Thomas described earlier. If they go like on turn 9, if they play Boseiju, on turn 10 they have the uncountable Shurntel, just focus on destroying Omniscience in response to whatever they're doing with your all your red blasts, or you still have disenchant. You maybe even have space for one judgment depending on the sideboard. So there's basically these two routes, and playing against unknown, I would not go super aggressive on cantrips, but if you know that they're geared up for it, it's definitely a valid move.
Sam.
That's pretty much covered it. You know, they're not going to be able to Boseiju every single spell they play in a turn, so, and they're not going to be able to Boseiju all the cards that matter in a single turn. So if they Boseiju, you just get the other stuff that matters. I'm not super concerned about it unless, you know, somehow I've already run out of counter spells and I don't have a counterbalance on board.
All right. I feel like the good cards we kind of already talked about for them. I mean, they bring in Defense Grid, possibly Boseiju. We have Red Elemental Blast. We have Wear Tear or Disenchant. Vendilion Clique is good.
It's also worth noting that they're probably playing Cunning Wish, so what they do sideboard does not matter as much to them, since they can just, you know, run a bunch of one-ofs in their sideboard if they want, and Cunning Wish for the most important of them, such as Wipe Away.
Exactly. So, do we feel comfortable moving on?
Sure.
Blade Control. So this is kind of lumped together. Patriot Blade, more Esper Control Blade.
Blue-White X Stoneforge Mystic.
Exactly. So, starting with Sam, how do you feel about this matchup?
This is, again, kind of similar to Death and Taxes in that their equipment is not going to, like, you want to keep their equipment off the board. It's not going to win you the game to do so, but it is going to keep you from losing. So that would be anything from removing Stoneforge Mystic before they get a chance to put something in play, out of the sideboard, Wear Tear, Disenchant on the Batterskull when they don't have the ability to block it. Other than that, I think it's kind of similar to playing against the Mirror Match in that a lot of the blue-white Stoneforge decks are going to be on somewhat similar plans of control the game, control the game, control the game, find a win condition.
Tomas?
I think we have to distinguish which deck we're playing. Are we talking about like Jeskai Blade?
Yes.
Like a blue, white, red?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. Okay. I think it's a fair matchup. But I think it's still fine for Miracles. As Sam said, we don't really want their equipment be on the battlefield or on in the play. But I think most important is to understand that we can maybe take some hit with Batterskull. We don't have to freak out. Also depends whether they are the aggressive one with Delver or without it. And we want to establish Counterbalance log, which is pretty good. And we can. And the good thing is that we just terminus everything away. They don't have stifles. So I feel pretty confident with this matchup. Definitely pre-board. After sideboard, it can be a bit more difficult as they have more Red Elemental Blast. They have maybe Meddling Mages, cards like that. But I think this matchup seems alright. We bring classic destruction against artifacts and enchantments against their equipment. I think Def and Texas is harder.
All right, Philip.
So a short anecdote to describe how I feel about this matchup at GP New Jersey. Whenever somebody asked me how I did, I was like, auto win. And this basically meant I played and won against either Delver or Stoneblade Mystic. So I don't, you can build Asper Control that it totally crushes Miracles, but the way people are building Stoneblade right now, they're just out of any contention of seriously messing with Miracles in any way. It's super good matchup. You have everything you want. They're just strictly inferior.
Okay. Because we're nearing on 2 hours, I think what we want to do is maybe tackle 2 more kind of major archetypes and then probably close out. So I think we want to focus on Rug Threshold and then BGX as kind of an overall archetype. So starting with Tomas and talking about Rug Delver.
Rug Delver is really challenging matchup. It's really fantastic, and if you're playing against good player, there are some of the best games you can have. At some point, people were not playing Stifles, then the matchup was basically a joke. But with their Stifles, it's very very tricky. So we have to remember how to play, when to fetch, and so on. But usually the best strategy for them is to keep Stifles for our Miracles. So that's very important to understand. Unlike, let's say, that blue, white, red, Counterbalance is almost end of the game for them. So that's the good thing. On the other hand, the Stifle is really big problem. They also have Nimble Mungus, which we can't Swords to Plowshare. We can't effectively block it with Snapcaster. So it can be very, very difficult, against this deck. I used to play the deck a lot. Before, in past, it was the best deck. Before Ghent in Amsterdam, that time it was the best deck, and it was really great. One thing we have to be afraid from the board is one card, Sulfuric Vortex. That's a card that he has nothing. You're on 14 life. You have CounterTop. He plays Vortex. You have no answer, and you die. Seriously, you die in 7 rounds or 6 rounds. It's horrible. So that's a card we have to be aware. And sometimes in the main deck, they play one Sylvan Library. If they get it through, it can be also extremely difficult to win and come back. Especially if we are Swords to Plowsharing their Tarmogoyfs and they are drawing some extra cards. So that's my look on this matchup. You have to respect Daze and Stifle.
Philip.
So I've been testing actually Canadian Threshold in the last 2 weeks, or maybe something about 2 weeks. I mean, like, it's inferior to Miracles, but I wanted to switch it up and learn something new. And so the misconceptions about Miracles and Canadian Threshold, or generally most Delver decks, you don't try to mana screw Miracles if you have Stifle. You just don't. It doesn't and will not work like 9 out of 10 times. Stifle is such an important counter when it comes to negating the really important spells that are Entreaty Angels and Terminus, that you really don't want to waste them on lands where they can easily dig out of it if they have top. Like, if they have top, there's no way you're countering a fetch land. If they don't have top and you have a hand that is capable of totally cutting them off, okay, do so, but generally keep your Stifles for something else. You really want to hold back your lands. You really want to have good brainstorms. You don't want to throw your brainstorms away in order to do something aggressively, because if you do that, you will not be able to keep up with Miracles in the late game. But if you play accordingly and keep your Stifles, you actually have enough permission, even if you play like Spell Pierce and Daces in a deck, to still be able to combat Miracles in the late game. And that's something people mostly forget. And know when to overextend and when not to. Sometimes it's correct to play 2 creatures. Mostly it's not, but always think twice and don't follow the idea of never overextending against miracles. But also don't go all in. Doesn't work.
Sam.
My favorite thing about this matchup is, like you said, you do have to respect days, but if you have the ability to get a turn 2 counterbalance out, which could just be you have 2 of them and you're willing to throw one away, or you are willing to counter days, the counterbalance is just so good in the matchup because I just pulled up a deck list to check, and they've got 4 Force, 4 Goyf, and the entire rest of the deck is lands and 1-drops. So I feel pretty good about the matchup as long as you're able to get counterbalance down before they've gotten a significant number of threats into play. Now, once they have got those threats into play, you've got essentially maybe 6 removal spells in addition to your sweepers, because Red Blast hitting the Delver is super relevant. Other than that, like I said, just if you can keep them down to a small number of threats, you're generally in a pretty okay position to execute the rest of your game plan, which is terminus away their threats and then entreat them.
If there's something I can say, I agree absolutely. I think counterbalance is so powerful; it's basically win condition. So after the board, we usually remove Jace, of course, because it's not very good. But you can even remove Entry the Angels. Depending how you feel, I'd still like to have some, but you can remove it and you just kill him with counterbalance top and click. That's enough. There's one thing I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I want to bring a Red Elemental Blast against the Rag Delver, because there are not that many cards you can hit. Of course, you can kill Delver, I agree, but you don't want to be fetching for a Volcanic too early, in my opinion. But I think you much rather have Flusterstorm, which can help you against Stifle, and it can also provide some counter backup, like a Red Elemental Blast would do. So I'm not sure about this one, but I agree.
One other thing I'd forgotten about, if you're like me and you're super greedy, bringing in Blood Moon in this matchup can be super, super strong, because then you've set them on their 4 bolts plus their whatever flex bolts they've got, and other than that, they have no way of playing any spells.
But you would still lose to, I guess, Sulfuric Vortex.
Yeah, and if I may say a thing or two about Blood Moon, these super impactful things that turn around games, they may seem well suited in a deck that has 20 cantrips, if you count Chase and Snapcaster, but I actually think that they're not. I think your goal should be to construct a deck in such a way that you basically have lands, counterspell, and removal, and then you have one win condition. Something like this. I don't think you actually want stuff that can turn around games, but also be completely worthless, even though you play 20 cantrips. But that's basically a design philosophy standpoint.
Fair enough. Moving on, the last one that we will have time for, and maybe we'll do more at another time. The Abrupt Decay decks, essentially. I know there's a lot to kind of go over. There's Punishing Jund, there's Bug, there's Junk, there's Dark Maverick, there's a lot, but we can generalize a little bit into the Abrupt Decay decks. Sam?
I mean, Death's Shadow is really, really strong against Miracles.
Especially if they have 2 of them, and then you Swords to Plowshares one. It's pretty good, I guess.
I mean, this is, again, I'm super greedy. I love bringing Blood Moon in this matchup. A lot of the BGX decks are playing 1 or no basics. Other than that, I think a really important target, kind of kill on sight, like I talked about with Elves, is Deathrite Shaman. It speeds them up. It gives them a clock. That's one of the cards I'm most concerned about. I haven't played Miracles in a while, so I'd be more interested to hear the other guys' opinions on the matchup.
Well, I think it's a big difference whether we are talking about Shardless Bug and whether we're talking about, for example, Jund. There are probably 2 most common Abrupt Decay decks I come across. I think Jund is in theory very difficult, but practically they can't really smooth their draws, and if you somehow survive the original assault, top is extremely powerful in this matchup, and you kill them with Entry the Angels. At least I always win 2-1. It's a powerful deck, but it's not stable enough in my opinion. That's my experience. That's here where you want to keep Counterbalance and bring Rest in Peace. But against Shardless Bug, I wouldn't bring in Rest in Peace. I would just and I would side out Counterbalance, so which to some extent blanks their Abrupt Decays. They have to keep some in because what if I have, or what for the third game I can bring Counterbalance back or something, rest in peace. But I think generally Snapcaster is fantastic. You want Red Elemental Blast, because that does a lot. It counters the draw 3, it destroys Jace, it kills Creeping Tar Pit if you need it. And this matchup is hard, and I enjoy it very much because I still think our deck is just so much more stable, so we can avoid some like blank draws when they draw land 2, 3 or something like that. So I think it's a hard matchup, but I think it's I still want to play it for miracles. One card they can really destroy our day is Null-Rod. That's one card. But the good thing about the matchup in Bug, in my opinion, is that they don't really have counters. They only have Force of Will. And with Liliana, they often discard both hands. Then when Liliana is on 6, you play Snapcaster, end of turn, you found from your top, you Source to Closure his only creature he just played. You attack Liliana down to 4, he has to minus it. So suddenly you like reset Liliana, so you're okay, and you still have top. And you can still entreat. And so Liliana basically helps you to resolve your entreat, if you know what I mean, against this deck. So I enjoy that the deck does not really have counters, and they can't really do anything. You play Jace, and there's not much they can do about it. So it can be tough, and a lot of people say it's a very bad matchup for Miracles, but I think it's not so bad.
Julian?
Well, I guess I got nothing to add to that.
Philip?
Just one thing. Entreat the Angels is your main game plan. If you're playing against like non-blue BGX, you're kind of like playing to entreat only. You're throwing all your resources on the table to survive and like entreat once and you win. Against Shardless it's a little bit trickier because you have to basically have entreat and one red blast. But yeah, I agree with most of what has been said already.
I think it's kind of interesting, like sometimes we see people bring in slaughter games and name and treat the Angels because they are very much aware of that this is the main game plan and that it changes a lot. So how do you feel like, or how would you approach the match if they actually slaughter game your Treat the Angels? Like, what's your main path to victory after that?
I actually had a game like that at Bazaar of Maxen last year. My opponent started with Thoughtseize, discarded my entreat, and then surgically extracted in the first turn.
Okay.
And I just went Ponder, Snapcaster, Ponder, Chase, bounce Snapcaster, Snapcaster, Ponder, attack, you're dead. Thanks for trying. Yeah, so basically the matchup gets super, super hard if they extract your Entreat Angels. If they have Punishing Fire, you can basically concede. If they have Punishing Fire and you have no Entreat, you're dead. If they don't have Punishing Fire, you can still eke out advantage with Snapcasters and Chases, but yeah.
Yes, that's I'm sorry, that's a deck of our friend, Niklas Kronberger, who plays Chalice of the Void. It's Agrolome with Chalice of the Void, Punishing Fire, all the naughty cards against us, and Slaughter Games in the board. And he has Galactics and Zeniths and everything. So this is super hard matchup. And when he has Punishing Fire and Slaughter Games, it can be actually, maybe I would admit for first time tonight that this is not a good matchup.
Oh, that's the deck we should be playing then.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and like toot the decks that I've been playing a lot because, again, I'm here to play a moderator. But I mean, there are certain selections of like Punishing Fire, Slaughter Games, Galactic, Planeswalkers that Miracles does have trouble with. And if you have a deck that has a lot of those cards in it, I don't think it's going to be fun to be on the Miracles side.
Yeah, agreed.
But I think then you suffer in other matchups because not all those cards are good against, say, Storm Combo, Sneak and Show, etc. So you have to pick your poison.
Yeah.
So I think because we're sitting at just over 2 hours for a cast, which is a little bit long, I think we're going to wrap it up. So if you wanted to say each one thing about the discussion about Miracles, we'll start with Thomas. Thomas?
I'm not saying, I try to play Miracles. It's really the best deck, have the patience and you'll be rewarded with absolutely amazing experience from the tournament where you will never have to say I was unlucky. I think it's worth it. It's fantastic deck. So try Miracles.
Philip?
Yeah, like it's the best deck for now. If you want to win, try it out. It's hard. It'll take a while, But as said earlier, it's super rewarding. And yeah, I hope I could convey the deck building philosophy of minimizing everything and cantrips. I really hope I did.
Julian.
What can I say? I mean, it is the best deck, and I rarely call a deck like the best deck. I always like calling it the strongest deck or whatever. But yeah, it's the thing that you should put your thoughts into. That's why every now and then I pick it up again and play it, because I feel I owe it to myself. And a friend of mine, Anton Kalinsky, he once said to a guy who wanted to pick up Miracles, if you pick up Miracles, know what you're doing. Because for the first 6 months, you will lose a lot. And you will be frustrated, because you're like, but I Terminus and I Snapcaster Swords, and in the end he still got me. But after half a year, you will finally get your win percentage up to where you want it to be. But yeah, I mean, from my side, all I can say, it's definitely worth it.
And lastly, Sam.
I'm going to revive a tradition from the first several podcasts. I am now going to sing a song about miracles. I believe in miracles. Where you from? You sex thing, you. I believe in miracles. Since you came along, you sex thing. You sexy thing in this instance is Entreat the Angels.
Very nice. Your rendition was excellent. So, thank you everyone for joining us on the cast. Thanks to Tomas for coming on, and nice to see Philip again, and obviously
Thanks for having me.
Julian and Sam. We'll always be here. So, like us on Facebook. Sam, paste the thing in where you say these things.
Okay.
Let's make this not one of those long, drawn-out, awkward goodbye hugs, and just say, "Okay, guys, tune in next
Let's
time."
say goodbye and all. Let's say goodbye and then all continue to walk the same direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
This stays in.
Questions, comments, and observations are always appreciated. You can reach us on Facebook at facebook.com/everydayeternalpodcast, on Twitter at eternalmtg, in the comments section on our website, or on MTG The Source. Matt is SDE_Matt on Twitter. Julian is It'sJulian23. Philip is Miracle_Dude. I'm The Craven, ONE. And Tomas is not on Twitter. Today's music has been the Battle Boss music from Nameless, the Hacker's RPG, an RPG for iOS, by Boxcat Games. Check out Boxcat Games at box-cat.com or on the iTunes App Store.